The big bark, listen up dog owners, it's for you, all you canine lovers. It's your favorite podcast, The Big Bark, with your host Darragh and canine co-hosts Bruno and Milly. The Big Bark.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Big Bark, the show where we are crazy about dogs everywhere. I'm your host Darragh, and join me as always are my canine co-hosts Bruno and Milly. I have to say it's been absolutely hectic the last few weeks with all the new episodes that we've had out, and I think last week was one of some of our fans' favourite episodes so far. We got amazing feedback from that episode, and that was Rochelle Mattis from Fetch a Date, who joined us all the way from Indiana last week. And this week we're back stateside again, and we're absolutely thrilled right now to be joined by the co-founder of School for the Dogs in New York, Annie Grossman. Annie, a huge welcome to The Big Bark and thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I love that your last name and your podcast sound the same.
Yeah,
in your accent.
they do actually. I never thought of that before. So, Annie, to start off, give us a bit of background on School for the Dogs.
Hi. I started School for the Dogs in 2011. I had been a journalist for about a decade before that, and realized I wanted to do something else with my life, and kind of on a whim, went to the Karen Pryor Academy thinking, dog training sounds like a fun career. And it really revolutionized my life. So I graduated there in 2010, and in 2011, I ended up meeting actually a neighbor, a woman who lived across the street from me, who was sort of in a similar position of trying to figure out how to transition from a previous career to a career in dog training, and we joined forces. Her name is Kate Sinisi. And for whatever reason, I got it in my head that we really had to have a classroom in New York City. Most dog trainers either operate out of clients' homes or out of like dog daycares or sort of places that they rent by the hour. But I was really hung up on the idea that we needed like a fixed space so that we could really control our environments to set our students up for success. So we converted my living room to a dog training center, and operated out of that for several years, and then graduated eventually to a storefront location, which is where we're located now. We teach classes, we teach private lessons, and we're also working virtually now, teaching people both in real time and with like on-demand sessions. But yeah, we didn't set out to start the kind of big small business that we have. We just thought, hey, we want to train dogs. No one's doing it the way we want to do it, so let's just do it ourselves. And 10 years later, we have like 10 trainers working for us in this, rather, for New York standards, large 2-story storefront facility. It's really grown like above and beyond anything either of us ever imagined.
So Annie, just for a second there, you mentioned like you were a journalist and you wanted to change your career. So what was it exactly that made you choose wanting to be a dog trainer?
That's a really good question. I'd always loved dogs. I joke that, so many people in their bios when they work with dogs, they're like, Jessica grew up with dogs and always loved dogs. So it feels like a cliche thing to say, but I really did always love dogs. I always felt very, I think I had a lot of empathy with dogs, and I got my own dog in 2005. Right, actually, when I had been in office jobs and I went freelance at that point, and just sort of fell in love with my dog and didn't really know very much about training, but I felt like it was something I was interested in learning more about, not because I had problems at all with my dog, but really because I thought like it was a fun way to spend time with dogs. And I remember during the sort of period of a couple of months where I was really meditating on like, okay, what can I do with my life at this point? I was I was about 30 years old. I sort of had this successful career, and I was like, how do I figure out this new thing? And I would make lists. I remember, and I would go to the dog park with my dog with a piece of paper and a pen and like make lists of things I like to do. Because I'm the kind of person where if I'm really not into it, if I'm not engaged in something I'm doing for work, I just kind of tend to check out, which does not make for a very good employee. So I thought, what would keep my interest? And I kept coming back to dogs and kind of looking around the dog park and thinking, I would really love a job where I could watch dogs, read about dogs, hang out with dogs, spend time with my dog, and talk to people about their dogs. Because that was sort of, for me, part of what I enjoyed about the dog park was like having conversations with people on this, subject that interested me. I mean, sometimes I look around at School for the Dogs today, where we actually have one that we run ourselves, and I think, oh my gosh, I really figured out how to set things up for a career that suits me, because that's basically what I do these days. Is I hang out with dogs, learn about dogs, talk to people about their dogs, and watch dogs, and it's pretty great.
And Annie, it is something about like dog owners. They just, whatever about like just loving to talk to other people. They love to talk to other people about their dogs.
I think dogs are endlessly fascinating. They, on the one hand, they have evolved to live with us or around us, and to take on a lot of, some of the even physical traits of children, right? When you think about breeds, for example, that are popular, a lot of them have these kind of infant-like proportions, the big eyes, even like the flat faces, round faces, and yet, so it's easy to kind of see them as like, as these sort of fuzzy children that live with us, and yet they're a completely different species with different needs, and ways of communicating that have nothing to do really with language, that we all rely on so heavily. So I think people, if people like talk about their dogs, it's because on the one hand they love them like children, and on the other hand they're so wildly different from us. And I think part of what really ended up appealing to me about the world of dog training was how little of it is about language. Having been a journalist and writing all the time and trying to craft sentences and convey ideas that way, I think I actually liked that the dog training that I was learning about really was something that you could do without hardly ever using words at all, and it's kind of beautiful in that way. But something else that really appealed to me about the whole world of dog training, these days I spend most of my time running the business, and I have a podcast about dog training called School for the Dogs podcast, and I write a lot about dog training, and I love doing that kind of stuff because early on I kind of looked around. I remember going to the Association for Professional Dog Trainers annual conference and looking around at all these just incredibly interesting people who were there, and thinking there are not enough people in my world, in my like New York City highfalutin media circles or whatever, who know about this, who know about what all of these incredible people are doing with dogs, and all of these people who are studying animal behavior. I'm not sure there's a lot of like flow, I guess. I wasn't sure there was a lot of flow sort of from that world to like the more mainstream world. Usually dog training was, in my experience, something people only thought about briefly, maybe when they got a puppy, and then not until maybe they had like a problem. But there's so much there that's interesting, exciting, fun. So early on I thought, I think ultimately I would like to use my background in, communication, through writing, creating content, however you want to call it, to help more people see how wonderful this whole world is. And I think there are, fortunately, I think there are a lot more people today than 10 years ago who see dog training as a legitimate hobby, and who see, behavioral science as something that we can work to understand in order to help train our dogs, rather than just some sort of pseudoscience that's like, one way of seeing things. So it's exciting to me to see dog training the way I think dogs should be trained, enter the mainstream a little bit more, as like a really exciting hobby. Because it's funny to me how, like, horses, like, you can be passionate about horses, and that's sort of a hobby people understand and even respect. But at least in a lot of circles, I think if your hobby is dog training, at least in New York City, where people generally speaking aren't doing obedience trials or agility, like they're just doing stuff in their living rooms with their dogs because they live in small spaces and have super busy schedules. But I know plenty at this point of doctors and lawyers and hedge fund managers who come home from work and do dog training with their dogs in their homes, and really as a hobby. And I think it's cool that more and more people are doing that, and I think it's becoming more understood as a real hobby, on the same level as, say, horseback riding.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's definitely something. It's even over this side of the Atlantic. It's people are doing a lot of training in the evenings when they come home from work with their dogs. It's something I've seen myself from even talking to other trainers here in Ireland. But let's go back to New York there, and what we specifically want to talk about, I think, today is especially about urban living with a dog. Now, for me, like over here in Ireland, one thing I've noticed is for a lot of letting agencies and landlords here in Ireland, they don't want to have dogs in rented accommodation. And is that something that you come up against in the States as well?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've even talked to people who are professional dog resume writers who will try and package your dog in in an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to try and make your dog a good candidate. I mean, I wonder if maybe that's changing, just because in New York City, for example, and I think in a lot of major cities, there have been so many vacancies in the last year as people have moved out to the suburbs in the country, which has made landlords more interested perhaps in accepting people with dogs. Whereas I kind of get it. Like, if I owned properties and could pick whoever I wanted, I would probably prefer to not have pets, because it's like there's there are a lot of unknown variables there. Of course, I think what's funny is that at least in my experience of apartments, cats really can do a lot more damage to an apartment than a dog can. What's a shame, in my opinion, is that there really is no standard for dog training. I mean, there's like the Canine Good Citizen test run by the AKC, which is something that we will have people prepare for and test them for at school for the dogs. I'm not sure if that's like international or if that's just in the States. So that's some sort of kind of like badge that you can achieve, that you can, say to a landlord, hey, my dog has, is a Canine Good Citizen. But ultimately, I think it would be really nice if there were some sort of standard that a dog and a person had to achieve some sort of badge, for lack of a better word, that they could show, that they could use to show that they are committed to training their dogs, committed to addressing problems, that their dog has no known behavioral issues. because if you might have the same dog with two different tenants, the dog who is barking his head off all the time, and you have one tenant who just thinks, I'm just going to let the dog cry it out, bark it out, no big deal. And you have another tenant who's committed to working with the dog, hiring a trainer, reading the books, doing the work. And so in those two cases, it has nothing to do with the dog. It has to do with the person who's with the dog, if that makes sense. Same thing with flying, like bringing a dog to a restaurant or whatever. Like there's so many dogs out there that, will be a certain dog with one kind of person and a certain dog with another kind of person, thanks to the training that is going into it. And it would be great, I think. I know some people working on this with flying, for example. It would be really great if you had a dog who was like a certified flyer who has demonstrated, the ability to sit at someone's feet for a long period of time, or to, go on a wee-wee pad, in the airport if necessary, rather than, sort of the opaque rules that currently exist around flying or going into public places, which may or may not be looked at in kind of a fuzzy way, depending on who's judging the dog and who the person is with the dog. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, like, when you look at, like, city apartments in general, they're a lot smaller than what you'd have out in the countryside, for example. So would you see, like, specific breeds that live in urban areas, or would it be a mix of breeds?
Oh, I have to say, we have a lot of poodle mixes and a lot of French bulldogs who come to school for the dogs. And a lot of rescue dogs who, are, mystery mutts, usually smaller in size. But we've had all different kinds of sizes of dogs. And, it's funny, I kind of bristle when people refer to designer dogs because, all man-made breeds started out as someone's idea of, hey, let's mix this breed and that breed to try and achieve, X, Y, or Z physical or behavioral qualities. And it's not like that was happening so long ago with most of the breeds we know. It's really in the last century and a half. And a lot of those breeds were created to be dogs that could excel in the environments we were putting them in. And I think part of the reason that doodles, that poodle mixes are so popular right now, your Labradoodles, Golden Doodles, Yorkie Poos, Cavapoos, the dudes and the poos, are because they generally speaking are really good apartment dogs. They don't shed. They are often very smart. They're often small enough that they can be put in a bag and brought on the subway if you want to bring the dog to work. Certainly they're cuddly and sweet and cute. So that I think in that way they do make good apartment dogs. French bulldogs are, they have some of those infantile qualities that I was talking about, the big faces, the big eyes, the smushed noses that make them kind of look like replacement babies. But they're also dogs that generally don't need a huge amount of exercise, which is a good thing if you live on the 20th floor of an apartment building. We certainly have clients who have border collies and sight hounds and dogs who do need a lot more both physical and mental enrichment. I think we have a certain kind of like self-selecting client at School for the Dogs, people who are going the extra mile to give their dogs what they need, even if what they need is not necessarily obvious, an obviously easy thing to provide in New York City. But I have clients who wake up every morning to bring their dog to the off-leash hours in Central Park before they go to work every day, or go running with their dogs. Our dog, we actually have started sending her hiking once a week, because we felt like we were not providing her. She's a young dog. She's like a sort of Chihuahua pit mix with a lot of other things thrown in there, and we just felt like we weren't getting her enough of the cardiovascular activity that she needed during the week. So she goes with a group of dogs out into the woods once a week. So people really do get creative about I think how they provide dogs with what they need.
Okay, that's very good. And I suppose like that's important, like you said, that's very important for their mental stimulation as well, because obviously it can be fairly hard to mentally stimulate a dog in a small apartment if, say, both partners are working from an office every day of the week. So like that's obviously fairly hard. Annie, one thing I'd love to ask you is, like, big cities can be, like, even for children as well, big cities can be very, very scary places, and especially for dogs. What tips can you offer dog owners who have, say, for example, previously lived in the country, which you'd see where a lot of, I suppose, people in their, like, maybe 20s or 30s who are now moving into the city, having lived in the countryside or in suburban areas when they were younger, and now want to, like, bring their dog with you. How do you adjust the dog to living in a big city after having so much freedom in the countryside?
Yeah, it's really hard, and unfortunately, I think some dogs, we call it, some dogs really develop suburban dog syndrome when they've lived in relatively sheltered areas and didn't get the proper socialization at a young age to help them acclimate to the sights, the sounds of city living. And we certainly have a lot of dog owners who are dealing with that, now, especially people who got dogs while they were taking a hiatus from the city, maybe in the last year. A lot of people in New York City took advantage of the ability to work from home, to get out of the city for a while, and got dogs, and now are coming back to New York City, which they're familiar with, but their dogs sure aren't. and they're coming to us both because they're now having to leave their dogs home a lot more, and their dogs were used to having them around 24/7, but also because their dogs are unaccustomed to walking down the city streets, which in New York City, you might see 10 other dogs out on the walk as you go around the block, and they're all going to be, they might be 2, 3, 4 feet away from you. So we have a class called Sidewalk Psychos, where we work very specifically on teaching dogs to be able to pass by other dogs on the street. I think fortunately, the class has a lot to do with what we call counter conditioning, teaching a dog that something that is scary actually is okay. And it's about, changing the underlying emotion. So rather than addressing, specifically the pulling or the barking, it's thinking about, well, what's causing the pulling or the barking, and generally speaking, it's fear. So we're working on how we can change that underlying emotion in tandem with giving the dog owners skills that they can implement to make sure that their dog has the best chance of succeeding in a stressful situation. I mean, what's like the actual choreography that you can do on the street with a leash and your dog to help your dog, not go into total freak out mode. So, there's a lot there, and I would suggest anybody who is dealing with any kind of like what we call reactivity on the street, get help sooner rather than later, because you don't want to be you don't want to be caught off guard in a bad situation with your dog freaking out, whether it's because of another dog on the street or a bunch of kids on scooters going by the dog. We have dogs, definitely have dogs who freak out about skateboards and scooters and that kind of thing. You want to have those tools like in your back pocket before it's a problem. So I would definitely suggest reaching out to a trainer, doing some research. That said, I think it's really important that people speak up for their dogs on the street and say, hey, my dog's not comfortable around other dogs, or my dog doesn't want to be pet by the group of schoolgirls who are coming towards us. I think it's such a simple thing, but we have the power to control others by telling them, hey, basically go away. And I mean, I'll even go so far as to make something up. My dog has glaucoma, don't come near, or something that just is enough to make people say like, oh, okay, rather than someone who's going to say, oh, it's fine, I grew up with dogs. We even sell, actually, in our shop, we sell leash sleeves that say, give me space, that you can put on your leash to kind of advertise, hey, my dog does not want, your dog or other people around. We also, we've had clients who've taught their dogs to wear muzzles, even though the dog might not have a history of aggression, simply because a cute, fuzzy, adorable, 5-pound dog with a muzzle on is a lot less likely to get bum rushed by people who want to come say hi to the dog, and that can help keep everyone safer. I also think it's really important to introduce your dog to things that are potentially stressful as incrementally as possible. We talk a lot about shaping when we're talking about good dog training. How can we raise criteria incrementally so that a dog is always succeeding? So a dog is always an A- student. That we're not pushing them beyond their limits. And as far as introducing a dog to like the city streets, that might mean taking your dog out for very, very short walks. And that's something I suggest to puppy owners often when they're first getting their puppies used to taking walks on the street of New York City. I'd much rather a dog go out for lots of quick, easy, pleasant walks than a dog go out for marathon walks a few times a day, because you want them to sort of just get these like little teaspoon tastes of what it's like, rather than bombarding them. And you want each walk to be a success. So short, quick, pleasant walks, bring lots of treats, bring food. For some dogs, you might not even be able to get outside right away. It might be the best step might be introducing your dog to the crazy urban environment by simply hanging out, maybe like in the foyer or lobby of your building, or even like on your front stoop, where it's sort of an in-between place, right? It's not quite the craziness of outside, and it's not quite the craziness of home. Sometimes I'll suggest people bring their dogs meals into one of those sort of in-between places, so your dog can at least sort of start to create some good associations. When a dog is eating, first of all, it's a good sign, because if a dog is too stressed out, they're often not going to eat, right? So if your dog is too stressed out to eat, then you have some information there, like that you need to like take things down a notch. But usually when a dog is eating, a dog is creating good associations. And, I always say most dogs are just creating good associations with like, leaning over a bowl on the kitchen floor, whereas we could use that same bowl of food to slowly try and help your dog learn, actually, oh, the stoop of the building is of our home is actually also an okay place, or this street corner, this park bench is actually also an okay place. That might mean having to be creative about your dog's pottying habits. We have one of our trainers on our staff has a dog who has pretty extreme urban anxiety, and in the process of dealing with it, one thing that they've done is to teach their dog to potty on a wee pad inside, so that they as the dog owners aren't having to drag their dog out 3-4 times a day to go outside. They've sort of created an indoor option, which means that they can take walks outside that are truly training walks, rather than sort of necessity pottying walks. Likewise, if you have an outdoor space in your home, and your dog is tending to do their business out there, and you live in an urban environment, I think it's really important to still make sure that you're taking your dog out for walks at least once a day, because there will be times when you want your dog out on the street, and whether it's a puppy or a dog who has not lived in a city before and you're trying to teach them about city life, it'll give you the opportunity to start socializing your dog to the sights and sounds of urban living. Also a great idea to walk your dog at times of day that are as peaceful as possible, or even if you have a smaller dog, carrying your dog out to places near you that are as the least chaotic places that you can find if you live on a very busy street. I think it's often a good idea, especially with small dogs, to have a dog who can be trained to go into a bag, so that you can bring your dog places and your dog can feel sort of safe and protected in that bag while you're holding them, rather than having to drag your dog to a chiller spot.
That's awesome, Annie. And okay, Annie, obviously the last year and a half, with COVID around the world, the pandemic has been very tough on all businesses. Are you somewhat getting back to normal life over there now, or?
Yeah. I mean, fingers crossed. We had to close our facility for a few months, and there was certainly a while where we weren't really, going into clients' houses. But yeah, things are starting to go back to normal, I would say. But one nice thing about this period, at least, has been that we've attracted clients from all over the world because we put more and more of our offerings online. So that's been a really nice silver lining, because so much of what we do as dog trainers does not involve touching a dog. Certainly, there are benefits of having someone in the room with you when you're working with your dog, but there are also situations where it can be quite beneficial to have someone coaching you that is not present. If you have a fearful dog, for instance, bringing a new person into the house might be a stressor. So I think being able to do more and more virtual sessions has been a boon, and I think that we will continue, which is something that can only really exist online, and I'm excited about that too, because it gives people a way to do dog training on their own schedule. It's more than you're going to get from reading a book, but it's something that people can do on their own time. So late at night, early in the morning, at hours when we as professional dog trainers maybe aren't available.
Brilliant, Annie. And Annie, if anyone wants to listen into the podcast, the School for the Dogs podcast, where's the best place to find it?
You can find School for the Dogs podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd also love to mention I have a free master class I put together. It's about an hour long. It gives a lot of information on how to kind of understand what reward-based, science-based dog training is. And that can be found at anniegrossman.com/masterclass. But yeah, I would love if your listeners would check out the podcast. We've done, I think like 170 episodes, and there's just so much information there. All of it completely free. And like I said, my goal is just to sort of get people excited about dog training in the same way that I'm excited about dog training.
Exactly. I myself have actually started listening to the podcast there in the last week. Absolutely loving it, and I'll be sure to recommend it to all our followers on social media as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Annie, thank you so much for joining me on the Big Bar today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I hope to have you on again in the future. And
oh, well, I would love that.
So that's all we have time for today, folks. Next week we are inviting back on a guest who was with us previously, and that is Pete Wedderburn, also known as a celebrity vet over here in Ireland. So we'll be meeting with Pete. Very excited to meet with Pete face to face this week, and it's great to actually get the face to face stuff going back again after these numerous lockdowns that we've had. If you want to find us, you know where we are. We're on social media, on the Big Bar Podcast, on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. And be sure also, while you're on Spotify and iTunes, check out the School for the Dogs podcast. And thanks again, Annie, for joining us today.
The Big Bark, listen up dog owners, is for you, all you canine lovers. It's your favorite podcast, The Big Bark, with your host Darragh and canine co-hosts Bruno and Milly. The Big Bark.